My name's Evan. I'm 27, and if you asked my friends, they'd tell you I'm the responsible one. The guy who pays bills on time, remembers birthdays, and somehow ends up driving everyone home after a night out. I don't say that to brag. It's just who I am. My family, on the other hand, has always seen my sense of responsibility as something to take advantage of rather than respect. My younger brother Liam, who's 23, is practically the opposite. He's charming, reckless, and somehow always gets away with whatever trouble he stirs up. It's like he's got this invisible shield that deflects consequences onto whoever's closest, usually me. Ever since we were kids, our parents seemed to have a blind spot for him. I'd come home with an A- and hear, "Evan, you can do better." Meanwhile, Liam would scrape by with a C in the same class, and Mom would beam like he'd just won the science fair. I used to tell myself they just didn't want to discourage him, but as we got older, the pattern stuck. If Liam forgot to pay his car insurance and got a late fee, I was the one who helped him out. If he borrowed money and never paid it back, Mom would give me that guilty smile and say, "He's just finding his footing, sweetheart. You've always been so stable." Translation: be the bigger person again. Last weekend was when it all started spiraling. I had just gotten home from a brutal week at work, 12-hour days, 3 project deadlines, and barely any sleep. I tossed my wallet and keys on the kitchen table, grabbed some water, and went to crash in my room for a quick nap. I didn't even think twice about leaving my credit card out. After all, it was just us in the house, and I'd been doing that for years. When I woke up, I noticed my wallet looked thinner than usual. My stomach sank as I checked inside. The card was gone. At first, I thought maybe I had misplaced it. Maybe I left it in my car or jacket pocket. But then I heard music blasting from Liam's room. Not just music, laughter. The kind of laughter that sounded like he'd just won the lottery. I knocked on his door, and he opened it with this smug grin plastered on his face. "What's up, big bro?" he said casually, like nothing was wrong. I asked him straight up if he'd seen my card. He didn't even try to deny it. "Oh yeah," he said, leaning against the doorframe. "I borrowed it. Don't worry, I just bought a few things." I felt this wave of anger creep up my spine, but I forced myself to stay calm. "What do you mean a few things?" I asked. That's when he pulled out his phone and proudly started scrolling through pictures, designer clothes, shoes, a new watch, and even screenshots of plane tickets to Miami. "Gotta treat yourself sometimes, right?" he said, like he was quoting some motivational poster. I stared at him in disbelief. "You maxed out my card?" I asked, my voice sharper than I intended. He shrugged, completely unfazed. "Relax, it's not the end of the world. You make good money, you'll pay it off in no time." Then he laughed, as if this whole thing was some big joke. I didn't laugh. I just stood there, frozen, feeling this strange mix of anger, betrayal, and something heavier, exhaustion. Because deep down, this wasn't just about a credit card. This was years of being the responsible one, the one who cleaned up every mess, finally boiling over. And right as I was about to say something I'd been holding back for years, I heard the front door slam. Dad's voice echoed through the house, angrier than I'd heard in a long time. "Who stole my $20,000? He bellowed. Liam's face lost all its color. And that's when everything started to unravel. Dad's voice shook the entire house. He didn't just ask, he demanded answers, every word echoing down the hallway like a hammer. Liam and I just stood there for a second, both stunned into silence. Then, as if on cue, Mom appeared from the living room, her face pinched with worry. "What's going on?" she asked, wringing her hands like she always does when Dad gets riled up. Dad stormed into the hallway, his face red, his eyes scanning between the two of us. "I checked my safe this morning," he said, his voice low but loaded with fury. $20,000, cash, gone. Someone in this house took it. I felt my heart start pounding in my chest. 20,000. That wasn't pocket change. That was life-changing money for most people. I opened my mouth to say something, but Liam beat me to it. "It wasn't me," he blurted, his voice too quick, too defensive. "I didn't even know you had that much cash lying around." Dad's gaze narrowed. "Then why are you dressed like you just robbed a boutique?" I couldn't help but glance at Liam. He was still wearing the new jacket he'd bought, tags barely cut off, looking like someone who had just come from a shopping spree. His face twisted, like he was scrambling to come up with an excuse. I had some savings," he stammered. "Been saving up for months." I nearly laughed out loud. Liam couldn't save $5 without spending it on takeout, let alone save enough for a shopping spree and a vacation. But I stayed quiet, because I knew how this was going to play out. Dad's anger was bad, but Mom's quiet disappointment was worse, and she was already starting to hover closer to Liam, like a shield. "Maybe we should all calm down," Mom said softly, putting a hand on Dad's arm. "You know how forgetful you can be sometimes. Maybe you misplaced it." That made Dad explode. "Misplaced $20,000? Are you hearing yourself, Claire?" His voice boomed again, and Mom flinched. "I counted that money yesterday. It was there. Now it's gone." Then his eyes landed on me. "Evan, where were you today?" I felt my stomach drop. "I was at work all day," I said carefully. "You can check my timesheets if you want. I just got home an hour ago." Dad stared at me for a long moment, and I could see him trying to decide whether to believe me. Meanwhile, Liam shifted uncomfortably, and that little movement drew Dad's attention like a magnet. "What about you?" he demanded. And here's where the favoritism kicked in. Instead of answering, Liam gave Mom this wide-eyed, innocent look he's perfected since childhood, the same one that got him out of trouble every single time. And, predictably, Mom stepped in again. "He said he's been saving," she said. "We should give him the benefit of the doubt." I couldn't stay quiet anymore. "Saving? Really?" I said, unable to hide the incredulity in my voice. "You do realize he used my credit card today, right? Maxed it out, actually. Clothes, shoes, a vacation." I saw the receipts on his phone. Mom turned to me like I had just betrayed a family secret. "Evan," she said sharply, "don't exaggerate. I'm sure he was going to pay you back." I felt my jaw tighten. He didn't even ask. He just took it. And now Dad's money is missing, and you're really going to stand here and pretend like this is a coincidence? Liam's face twisted into something ugly. "Wow, way to throw me under the bus," he said, his voice dripping with fake hurt. "I thought we were brothers." "Brothers don't steal from each other," I shot back. "Enough," Dad roared, cutting us both off. "This isn't about your card, Evan. This is about my money. And I'm not going to stand here and let this turn into a circus." That was the moment I realized just how unfair this was going to be. Dad was furious, sure, but he wasn't looking for the truth. He was looking for someone to blame quickly so he could feel in control again. And because Liam had Mom shielding him, I had this sinking feeling I knew exactly who would take the fall. Sure enough, 10 minutes later, Mom was gently suggesting that maybe Evan accidentally picked it up, thinking it was his. I stared at her in disbelief. Why would I take cash from Dad's safe? I didn't even know the combination. "Because you've been stressed lately," Mom said softly, like she was trying to be reasonable. "Work has been hard on you. Maybe you panicked about money." I almost laughed, not because it was funny, but because it was so ridiculous. I make good money. I have a steady job. I'm the last person in this house who would need to steal anything. But Liam just stood there, letting me take the heat, saying nothing. That night at dinner, the tension was unbearable. Dad sat in silence, his jaw clenched, while Mom tried to smooth things over with small talk. Liam, on the other hand, acted like nothing had happened. He even had the audacity to talk about his upcoming trip to Miami, going on about the clubs he was going to hit and the hotel he booked. "Must be nice," I muttered under my breath, and Liam smirked. "It is," he said, just loud enough for me to hear. After dinner, Dad pulled me aside. "Look," he said, his tone softer now, but still stern. "I don't want this tearing the family apart. If you took the money, just say so. We can work something out." I stared at him, stunned. "You really think I took it?" I asked quietly. He hesitated, then sighed. "I don't know what to think right now, but someone in this house did." And that was it. No matter what I said, no matter how much proof I had about Liam using my card, the suspicion was still on me. I went to bed that night feeling something inside me snap. It wasn't just anger anymore, it was resolve. Because if they were going to treat me like the villain no matter what I did, then maybe it was time to stop playing the hero. The next morning, I heard Liam laughing on the phone with one of his friends, bragging about how smooth he was for pulling off this whole thing without getting caught. And that's when an idea started forming. A dangerous, satisfying idea that made my heart race. But before I could even start figuring out what to do next, Dad came knocking on my door, his face grim. "Pack your things," he said. "If we don't figure out what happened by tonight, you're moving out." I froze. "You can't be serious." "I am," he said flatly. "I can't have a thief under my roof." And that was the moment I realized just how far this was going to go. and just how much I was going to have to fight back. The next 24 hours were some of the longest of my life. Every minute felt like I was walking on eggshells. Dad barely spoke to me unless it was to ask another pointed question, and Mom seemed to avoid me entirely, whispering to Liam in hushed tones like I was some dangerous stranger in the house. I could feel it in the air. The verdict had already been decided, and I was guilty until proven innocent. I went to work that day with a pit in my stomach, trying to focus but constantly checking my phone in case something blew up at home. When I finally got back that evening, I noticed something strange. My bedroom door was slightly ajar. I never leave it like that. My chest tightened as I pushed it open. Inside, my room looked like a hurricane had hit it. Drawers pulled out, closet rifled through, bed turned over. My laptop was sitting on the desk, turned on, which was odd because I always shut it down before leaving. At first, I thought maybe Dad had searched my room looking for the missing money. But then I noticed something that made my blood run cold. My backpack, the one I use for work, was unzipped and sitting in the middle of the floor. I knelt down and started checking it. My work badge was there, my notebook, my headphones, but my emergency cash envelope, the one I keep hidden just in case, was gone. It wasn't a huge amount, maybe $1,000, but it was mine, saved from side gigs, overtime pay, and careful budgeting. I kept it as a safety net for car repairs or unexpected bills. And now it was gone. I stormed out of my room and found Liam lounging on the couch, scrolling through his phone like he didn't have a care in the world. "Where's my money?" I demanded, my voice shaking. He looked up lazily. "What money?" "You know exactly what money," I snapped. "The envelope in my backpack, the one I hid under everything. It's gone, Liam." "Where is it?" He smirked. That infuriating, smug little smirk that always meant he was about to say something designed to get under my skin. "Oh, that," he said casually, as if we were talking about borrowing a pair of socks. "Yeah, I found it. I needed some extra cash to finish paying for my trip. Don't worry, I left you a little something." I marched back to my room, ripped open the backpack again, and found a single $5 bill sitting at the bottom of the pocket. I couldn't believe it. He had cleaned me out, my entire safety net, and had the audacity to act like leaving me $5 was some sort of favor. I felt something inside me snap. "Are you serious right now?" I shouted, storming back into the living room. "You broke into my room, stole my money, and you think this is okay?" Liam didn't even flinch. "Relax, man. You were going to spend it eventually." I just accelerated the timeline. Mom appeared from the kitchen at that moment, her face already twisted into that look she gets when she thinks I'm overreacting. "What's going on now?" she asked, sighing like she was the victim in all this. "He stole from me," I said, pointing at Liam. "Again, he took every dollar I had saved. That was my emergency fund, Mom." Mom glanced at Liam, who immediately put on his innocent face, and then back at me. "Evan," she said, her voice full of forced calm, "you don't need to yell. If he took it, I'm sure he had a good reason." "A good reason?" I could feel my heart pounding in my ears. "A good reason? He's going to Miami to party, Mom." "That's not a reason. That's theft." "Don't be dramatic," she said softly, as though I was some hysterical child throwing a tantrum. "You're not going to miss it. You make plenty of money. Your brother doesn't have the same opportunities you do." I almost laughed. "He doesn't have the same opportunities because he blows every chance he gets." I said, "I worked for that money. I stayed late at work, skipped nights out, saved every penny. And you're telling me it's fine for him to just take it because he felt like it?" "Stop yelling at your mother," Dad's voice boomed from the hallway. He stepped into the living room, his expression thunderous. "I'm done with this fighting. If you two can't live under the same roof without screaming at each other, then one of you needs to leave." I stared at him, stunned. "You're seriously threatening to kick me out? After he's the one stealing from everyone?" "That's enough," Dad snapped. "You've been nothing but trouble since this money went missing. If you can't calm down, you're out tonight." Liam sat there smirking like the cat who got the cream, and that was the moment, the exact moment. I felt every last shred of trust one had in my family snap. It wasn't just about the missing money anymore. It wasn't even about the credit card or my savings. It was about years of being treated like the backup plan, the scapegoat, the one who was expected to shoulder everyone else's mistakes and keep quiet about it. That night, I didn't sleep. I just lay there, staring at the ceiling, my mind racing. I kept replaying the look on Liam's face, that smug grin as if he'd won some great victory. I thought about Mom's soft voice, telling me to stop being dramatic. I thought about Dad, ready to throw me out over something I didn't even do. By morning, something inside me had changed. I didn't feel angry anymore, not in the loud, explosive way I had the day before. This was colder, sharper. I got up early, showered, and dressed for work like nothing had happened. I even said good morning to Mom as I passed her in the kitchen. But inside, I was done. Done playing nice. Done covering for Liam. Done letting my family treat me like the villain in a story where I'd done nothing wrong. I didn't know exactly how I was going to do it yet, but one thing was crystal clear. If they wanted to see me as the bad guy, then maybe it was time I stopped trying to be the good one. Later that afternoon, I got a call from the bank that made everything 100 times worse and gave me the final push I needed. The charges on my card had gone over the limit. There were late fees stacking up because Liam hadn't just maxed it out. He tried to use it again, and the transaction bounced. When I confronted him about it that evening, he laughed. Actually laughed, like it was the funniest thing he'd ever heard. "Guess you should have had a higher limit, bro," he said, still chuckling. I stared at him, every muscle in my body tight. "You think this is funny?" I asked quietly. He leaned back, grinning. "Yeah, kind of. I mean, what are you gonna do? Call the cops? Tell Dad?" And that's when I smiled. A small, cold smile that wiped the grin right off his face. "Oh," I said, my voice calm and almost cheerful. "You have no idea what I'm going to do." The next few days felt like living under a microscope. Every time I walked into a room, the conversation would stop. Mom would give me that pitying look like she was trying to silently will me to confess to something I didn't do. Dad barely spoke to me at all except to issue reminders. "If this money doesn't turn up, you're gone." It was like he'd already built the case against me in his mind and was just waiting for me to crack. The worst part wasn't even the suspicion. It was how normal everything seemed for Liam. He floated around the house like nothing had happened. He laughed loudly in the kitchen with Mom, talked about his trip, even invited friends over one evening to show off his new clothes. The sound of their laughter drifting up the stairs while I sat alone in my room gnawed at me. It wasn't just anger anymore. It was humiliation. I had become the family villain, the black sheep overnight, and there was nothing I could do to prove my innocence. On the third night, Dad knocked on my door. I braced myself, hoping maybe he'd come to his senses. Instead, he handed me an envelope. "This is enough for first and last month's rent somewhere," he said stiffly. "I think it's best you find your own place." I stared at the envelope, then back at him. "So that's it. You're throwing me out over money I didn't take." Dad's jaw tightened. "This has gone on long enough, Evan. I need peace in this house. And until you're willing to admit what you did, there won't be any." I wanted to yell, to fight, to demand that he open his eyes and see what was happening, but instead I just nodded. Because in that moment, something shifted inside me again. If they wanted me gone, fine. I would leave. But not before I figured out how to make sure they understood exactly what they had done. The next morning, I packed my things quietly. I didn't make a scene. I didn't slam doors. I just folded my clothes, packed my laptop, and put the envelope Dad had given me into my backpack. Mom came to the door as I was zipping up the last suitcase. "You don't have to be so cold about it," she said softly, like I was the one being unreasonable. I turned to her, meeting her eyes for the first time in days. "You believed him over me without a second thought," I said quietly. "I've never stolen a thing in my life. I've always been the one you could count on. And this is how you repay me." Her face flickered. Guilt. Maybe, but she didn't say anything. I carried my bags out to the car. Liam was sitting on the porch, sipping coffee like it was any other morning. "Safe travels," he called out with a smirk. I didn't answer. I just got in the car and drove away, gripping the steering wheel until my knuckles turned white. I spent that first night at a friend's place. He didn't ask many questions, just handed me a spare blanket and let me crash on the couch. Lying there in the dark, staring at the ceiling, I felt the weight of everything finally settle on me. I had been cast out of my own family home, branded a thief, humiliated, and betrayed by the very people who were supposed to have my back. The next morning, I went to the bank to check my account. The damage was worse than I thought. The card was maxed, the fees were stacking up, and I was suddenly staring down a balance that was going to take months to pay off. I sat there in the parking lot for a long time after, just letting it all sink in. That was my rock bottom. Not just because of the money or the fact that I'd been kicked out, but because for the first time in my life, I felt completely untethered. The irresponsible one, The guy who always had it together, gone. My family didn't trust me, my finances were wrecked, and I had nowhere to go but up. And strangely, that's when a kind of clarity set in. I stopped thinking about how unfair it all was and started thinking about what came next. I pulled out my phone and started making a list, not of revenge, not yet, but of everything Liam had taken from me. The card charges, the cash from my backpack, the laptop he'd borrowed and never returned months ago, the tools from the garage he had sold without asking. I wrote it all down, line by line, until the screen was full. Then I started another list. Every time my parents had blamed me for something that was actually his fault. Every time they had covered for him. Every time I had been told to be the bigger person. It wasn't just about money anymore. This was a pattern, years of being pushed aside, gaslit, and used as the scapegoat. When I looked at those two lists side by side, something hardened in me. I wasn't just going to walk away from this. I was going to make sure this pattern stopped with me. Over the next week, I kept my head down. I crashed at my friend's place, picked up extra shifts at work to start patching the financial hole Liam had left me in, and slowly started to put a plan together. I didn't talk about it to anyone, not even my friend, but every night after work, I'd sit with my laptop and start digging. I went through old emails, bank statements, and receipts. I started pulling together a timeline of Liam's spending, not just what he had taken from me, but his entire pattern of behavior. I combed through every overdraft, every suspicious purchase, every time Dad had mysteriously had to cover for him. Piece by piece, I built a picture that was impossible to ignore. And the more I found, the calmer I felt. It wasn't anger anymore. It was focus. One evening, while I was sitting in the living room with my laptop open, my friend walked in and glanced at the screen. "You're building a case," he said quietly. I looked up at him and, for the first time in days, smiled. "No," I said softly. "I'm building the truth." But then came the call that changed everything. It was Dad. His voice was clipped, cold. "We need to meet," he said. "The money still hasn't turned up, and I have questions." I agreed to meet him that weekend. Not at the house. I wasn't ready to step foot back in there, but at a diner near his work. As I hung up the phone, my heart started to race. This was it. This was the moment everything was either going to get worse or finally start to turn. I closed my laptop, slid the growing stack of evidence into my bag, and stared at my reflection in the dark window. For the first time in weeks, I felt ready. And when Saturday came, I walked into that diner with one thought in my mind. If they wanted answers, I was going to give them more than they ever bargained for. Saturday morning came quicker than I expected. I woke up early, not out of excitement, but because my mind was already racing. I'd barely touched breakfast, just coffee and toast, and drove to the diner with my evidence folder sitting on the passenger seat. It felt heavier than it should have, like all the years of being the family's problem solver had been condensed into a single manila folder. Dad was already there when I arrived, sitting in a booth near the back, arms crossed. His expression was unreadable. I slid into the booth opposite him and set the folder on the table. "Before you say anything," I began, my voice calm, "I didn't take your money. I never did." He stared at me, his jaw tight, but he didn't interrupt. I opened the folder and started laying out the printouts and receipts I had collected. Bank statements showing the credit card charges from the exact time I was at work. Screenshots of Liam's social media posts bragging about his shopping spree. Photos of items he'd bought that were now sitting in plain sight at the house. At first, Dad's face didn't change. But as I kept going, adding in the dates, the charges, even the ATM withdrawal that matched the cash missing from my backpack, I saw the anger start to drain from his expression, replaced by something else. Realization. "Evan," he started, but I held up a hand. "There's more," I said, flipping to the second half of the folder. This was the part that went beyond me. The list of times Liam had borrowed money from them, wrecked the car and blamed it on someone else, skipped payments that Dad had to cover, even pawned off Dad's old guitar once to buy concert tickets. When I finished, there was a long silence between us. The clatter of plates and chatter of other diners felt strangely distant. Finally, Dad sighed and leaned back in the booth. "I should have seen this," he said quietly. "I wanted to believe." He trailed off, rubbing a hand over his face. "I'm sorry, Evan. I should have believed you." Those words landed heavier than I expected. I'd been waiting to hear them for days, maybe even years, and now that I had, they didn't feel like enough. "Sorry doesn't get my money back," I said quietly. Or fix the fact that you kicked me out without proof. I know, Dad said. He looked older than I'd ever seen him. I can't undo what's been done, but I can make it right going forward. I nodded slowly, but I didn't commit to anything. I left the diner that day not angry, but not satisfied either. It wasn't about Dad anymore, not fully. The truth was out, but Liam was still living in that house, still laughing, still getting away with everything. That was the day I decided I wasn't just going to clear my name. I was going to change everything. Over the next few weeks, I threw myself into work. I picked up overtime, volunteered for extra projects, and even negotiated a small raise after presenting my boss with a cost-saving idea I'd been sitting on for months. My paychecks got bigger, and for the first time since the card fiasco, my bank account started to look healthy again. Outside of work, I started getting serious about my future. I moved out of my friend's place and into a small but comfortable apartment closer to downtown. It wasn't much, but it was mine. No one could barge in and rifle through my stuff. No one could accuse me of anything. I set it up exactly how I wanted: clean, organized, quiet. I also started reaching out to old friends and colleagues, rebuilding the social circle I'd let slip while spending so much time putting out fires for my family. I realized how much I'd been missing out on. Invitations I'd declined, trips I'd postponed, opportunities I'd passed on because I was too busy being responsible back home. And as my confidence started to grow, so did my sense of purpose. I kept adding to my folder of evidence, not just against Liam, but also a log of every repayment I made toward the debt he'd created. Every late fee I covered, every interest charge. I wasn't just planning to confront him anymore. I was building a case so airtight that when the time came, there'd be no escaping it. Then came the call from Mom. She sounded nervous, like she didn't know how to start. "Your father told me about what you showed him," she said. We didn't realize how bad things had gotten with Liam. We thought we were helping him by protecting him, but I see now we were just enabling him. I didn't say anything right away. I let her words sit there. "I want you to come by the house," she said finally. "We need to talk as a family." I agreed, but this time I didn't go as the guilty, apologetic son. I went as someone who had his life together, who had his evidence ready, and who wasn't going to be dismissed or silenced. When I walked through the front door, Liam was sprawled on the couch, looking smug as ever, until he saw me. His smirk faltered for just a second, and that was enough to tell me that somewhere deep down, he knew the game was up. Dad was waiting at the dining table, Mom next to him, both of them looking uneasy. "Sit down," Dad said. I did, calmly, quietly. And then, for the first time in my life, I laid everything out without fear. Not just the money, not just the card. I talked about the years of being blamed, the times I had to clean up Liam's messes, the times I had been told to be the bigger person while my own needs were brushed aside. Mom's eyes welled up with tears, but I didn't stop. This wasn't about making them feel bad. This was about making them finally see. When I finished, the room was silent. Then Dad turned to Liam. "Do you have anything to say for yourself?" And that's when Liam did something that shocked even me. He laughed. "Wow," he said, leaning back in his chair. "You really kept receipts, huh? You sound like some kind of lawyer." He smirked at me, like this was all just a game. "You think this is going to make them love you more or something?" "Sorry, bro, but I'm still the favorite. Always will be." For a second, I just stared at him. And then I smiled, slow, cold, the kind of smile that made his smirk falter again. Because at that moment, I realized something important. Liam wasn't scared yet. But he was going to be. That night after the family meeting, I didn't drive straight back to my apartment. Instead, I sat in the driveway for nearly half an hour, engine off, just staring at the house. Inside, I could hear faint arguing, Dad's sharp tone, Mom's softer voice trying to smooth things over, and Liam's indignant shouting. I didn't need to hear the words to know what was happening. For once, they weren't arguing with me. They were arguing about him. And strangely, that gave me a sense of calm. When I finally left, I felt lighter than I had in weeks. Not because the situation was resolved, far from it, but because the tide had finally started to turn. For the first time in my life, my parents had seen the full scope of what Liam had done, and it had rattled them. But Liam's smug laugh earlier had told me everything I needed to know. He still thought he was untouchable. If this was going to end, it wasn't going to end with a conversation. It was going to end with consequences. Over the next few weeks, I became sharper, more deliberate. My life started to flourish in ways I hadn't expected. My boss noticed my performance at work and offered me the chance to lead a small project, something that came with a stipend and a shot at a promotion. I said yes immediately. The extra money helped me pay off the last of the charges Liam had racked up on my card, which felt like closing a wound that had been bleeding for too long. But I didn't just focus on work. I kept adding to the evidence I had on Liam. I tracked his spending habits, his social media posts, and even got copies of text messages from a mutual friend who was fed up with him bragging about gaming the system. The texts were gold. Liam outright admitting he'd used my card, laughing about how mom would always cover for him, and even mentioning the missing $20,000, joking that dad should have hit it better. I printed every single one and filed them neatly in a binder. Then came the moment that shifted everything. One evening, while I was dropping off some old documents at my parents' house, I overheard Dad on the phone in his office. His voice was low, serious. "If we can't get the money back by next quarter, we'll have to take out another loan," he said. I don't care whose idea it was. 20 grand doesn't just walk out of a safe. I froze in the hallway. So it wasn't just about stolen cash. That money had been set aside for something important. I later learned it was a payment for an investment property Dad had been trying to close on, something that would have brought in rental income. The missing cash hadn't just caused tension at home. It had thrown a wrench into his plans. That's when it clicked. This wasn't just about family anymore. This was about leverage. If I could find where that money had gone, if I could prove exactly what Liam had done with it, I wouldn't just be clearing my name. I'd have the power to force real change. I started digging deeper. I combed through bank statements, looking for cash deposits that matched the timeline. I even pulled credit reports, legally, since I had access to my own, and started piecing together where Liam might have gotten the funds to pay for certain things. Then I got lucky. Through one of Liam's friends, I learned that he had been bragging about booking a luxury suite for Miami and paying in cash to avoid a paper trail. That sent me down a rabbit hole of phone calls and emails to the hotel until I finally got confirmation. The deposit amount matched almost exactly what had gone missing from Dad's safe. I had him. But instead of rushing to show my parents, I sat with that knowledge for a while. There was a strange satisfaction in knowing I finally had all the pieces. Every time Liam posted another smug selfie on social media, every time he flaunted a new purchase, I just smiled. Because now I knew I could pull the rug out from under him whenever I wanted. I used that time to get my own life fully in order. I boosted my savings, started working out again, and even reconnected with some college friends. My world, which had felt so small and suffocating a month ago, was starting to expand. And the better I felt, the clearer my plan became. When Dad called me a week later and asked if I'd found anything else, I told him calmly that I had. "I know where the money went," I said. There was a long pause. "Are you going to tell me?" "Not yet," I said evenly. "I think Liam needs to hear it first. All of it." And that was when I set the date. The following Saturday, I called a family meeting, this time on my terms. I told them to come to my apartment, not the house. I wanted them on neutral ground, in my space, where I controlled the conversation. When they arrived, I had everything ready: the binder with all the evidence, the screenshots, the hotel confirmation. I had even printed out a summary sheet, a clean, bullet point list that showed the exact amount Liam owed me personally, plus what he had stolen from Dad. Liam came in last, still wearing that lazy grin. "So what's this about?" he asked, glancing around my place like he was inspecting it. "Wow, nice apartment. Guess you're doing okay after all." I didn't rise to the bait. I just gestured for him to sit down. Mom looked nervous. Dad looked grim. "This," I said, placing the binder on the table, "is the truth. And tonight, we're going to read every page." For the first time since this all began, Liam's grin faded completely. I could see the unease starting to creep in, and I hadn't even opened the binder yet. The room was so quiet I could hear the hum of my refrigerator. Liam shifted in his chair, clearly trying to look bored, but the slight twitch in his jaw gave him away. Mom sat with her hands clasped together, glancing nervously between us. Dad just stared at the binder on the table like it was a bomb waiting to go off. I took my time opening it. Not because I wanted to be dramatic, though part of me did, but because I wanted them to feel the weight of what was coming. Every page I turned felt like a hammer dropping. "This," I said calmly, sliding the first set of pages across the table, "is a list of every charge made on my credit card on the day it went missing from my wallet. Each one has a timestamp that matches the hours I was at work. The bank confirmed the transactions came from my card. And if you'll notice, I flipped to the next page. Several of these purchases match photos you posted online, Liam. The jacket you're wearing right now? The sneakers you bragged about on Instagram? All purchased on my card. Liam's face darkened, but he didn't say anything. I turned to the next section. This, I continued, is a record of the cash I kept hidden in my backpack. Gone, the day after I confronted you about the card. And here, I pulled out a printed screenshot of a text exchange between Liam and one of his friends. Is you bragging about how you scored an extra $1,000 from me because I was too uptight to notice. Mom sucked in a sharp breath. Dad's expression hardened. And finally, I said, flipping to the last section, this is the deposit slip from the hotel in Miami where you booked that luxury suite. The amount matches exactly what went missing from Dad's safe, to the dollar. I let that hang in the air for a moment before sliding the summary sheet across the table. In total, you owe me just over $6,400 personally, plus the $20,000 you stole from Dad. That's $26,400 you've taken from this family. And tonight, you're going to pay it back, one way or another. Liam scoffed, though his voice cracked slightly. Or what? You gonna call the cops on me? Have me arrested? I leaned back in my chair, my expression calm. If that's what it takes. But I'd rather settle this here, quietly, without police reports or court dates. Because I have enough evidence here to file a fraud claim with the bank, a police report for theft, and to freeze your accounts while the case is investigated. And you know what happens then, Liam? You don't go to Miami. You don't go anywhere. For the first time, I saw fear flash in his eyes. I'm giving you a choice, I said. You can make this right. Transfer the money, sell whatever you need to, do whatever it takes, or we take this public. And you'll be explaining to everyone why your own brother had to press charges just to get his money back. Mom opened her mouth to speak, but I held up a hand. No, this isn't negotiable. I've spent my entire life being told to be the bigger person, to let things go, to keep the peace. And where has that gotten me? Kicked out of my home, paying off someone else's debt, treated like a criminal. Dad's voice was quiet but firm. He's right, he said, turning to Liam. This ends tonight. Liam's smirk was gone completely now. He sat there, staring at the binder like it might bite him. I don't have that kind of money, he muttered. Then figure it out, I said, my tone still calm but edged with steel. Sell the car. Sell the clothes. Sell whatever you have to. You have 2 weeks. After that, I go to the police. The silence stretched on so long it felt suffocating. Finally, Liam stood up, knocking his chair back. This is insane, he snapped. You're ruining this family over money. I stood too, meeting his glare head on. No, I said evenly. You ruined this family when you decided that everyone else's hard work was your personal piggy bank. He stormed toward the door, but Dad's voice stopped him cold. Sit back down, he said sharply. You're not leaving until we figure this out. That was the first time I'd ever seen Dad take my side so decisively. And it felt good, powerful even. For the next hour, we went through every item on the list, line by line. Liam tried to argue, tried to claim some purchases weren't his, but every time I had a receipt or a screenshot ready. By the end, there was no denying it. Not for him, not for my parents. When we were done, Liam slumped back in his chair, pale and furious. Fine, he muttered. I'll get the money. You'll get all of it, I said, and you'll do it without borrowing from Mom or Dad. This is your mess to clean up. He glared at me, but he didn't argue. As they left my apartment that night, Mom looked at me with tears in her eyes. I'm sorry, Evan, she said softly. We should have believed you. I didn't say anything. Not because I didn't appreciate it, but because I knew this wasn't over yet. Because revenge, I realized as I closed the door, isn't just about payback. It's about changing the balance of power forever. And this was only the beginning. 2 weeks can feel like a lifetime when you're waiting for someone to make good on a promise. Every day after that family meeting, I half expected a call from Liam begging for more time, or worse, some new drama meant to deflect attention away from what he owed. But to my surprise, he went quiet. Almost too quiet. I stayed focused on my own life, determined not to let him drag me back into the chaos. My work project hit a milestone, and my boss commended me in front of the entire team. I even started going to the gym regularly, finding a sense of routine I hadn't had in years. Each day that passed, I felt myself getting stronger, not just physically, but emotionally. Then, on the 13th day, I got a text from Dad. Family meeting tomorrow. Bring your binder. When I arrived at the house the next evening, I noticed something immediately different. Liam's car wasn't in the driveway. The flashy coupe he had been so proud of was gone. Inside, the living room was strangely quiet. Liam was sitting on the couch, hunched over, looking more subdued than I'd seen him in years. His usual cocky posture was gone, replaced by something closer to defeat. Dad sat at the head of the table, a checkbook in front of him, but not in a way that suggested he was about to bail Liam out. Mom sat next to him, her expression serious, her hands folded tightly in her lap. I sat down without saying a word. Liam cleared his throat. "I got the money," he said finally, his voice low. He slid a cashier's check across the table. I glanced at it. The amount was exact. $26,400. "Where'd you get it?" Dad asked. Liam didn't look at him. "Sold the car. Sold my watch. Sold other stuff." Dad nodded, not looking smug or proud, just tired. "Good. This is what accountability looks like." I picked up the check, slipped it into my folder, and looked at Liam. "This pays off the debt," I said evenly. "But it doesn't erase what happened. I won't be covering for you again. Ever." Liam flinched at that, and for a moment, I thought he might snap back with one of his usual sarcastic remarks. But instead, he just nodded once and stared at the floor. Mom reached out, placing a hand on my arm. "Evan," she said softly, "I know we can't undo the way we treated you. But I want you to know, we see you now. Really see you. And we're going to do better." For the first time in months, I felt some of the tension in my chest ease. "I hope so," I said, "because I'm done being the family scapegoat. If we're going to have a relationship, it has to be built on respect, for all of us." Dad nodded firmly. "Agreed. Things are going to change around here." He turned to Liam, his tone sharp but not angry. "Starting with you. No more handouts. No more excuses. You want to be treated like an adult? Then act like one." The meeting ended not with shouting, not with slamming doors, but with a quiet that felt different. Not tense, not accusatory, just resolved. When I left that night, I stood on the porch for a moment, looking out over the yard where Liam and I used to play catch as kids. For the first time, I didn't feel weighed down by anger or bitterness. I felt free. As I slid into my car, I caught a glimpse of Liam through the window. He was still sitting on the couch, staring at the floor, his usual grin nowhere to be found. And I realized something important. Revenge hadn't been about destroying him. It had been about taking back control of my own life. As I started the engine and pulled out of the driveway, a small smile spread across my face. Because for the first time in years, the balance in our family had shifted, and this time, it was on my terms. And that was the last time I ever had to raise my voice to be heard.